If someone gave you $1,000 today, what would you do with it? It's kind of a fun question to wrestle with. If someone gave you $1,000, maybe you'd save it. Maybe you'd buy something new or pay off some debt that you owe. Maybe you'd give some or all of it away. What would you do if someone gave you $1,000 this morning? Here's a more fun question. What would you do if someone gave you $10,000 this morning? It's pretty obvious, right? It's pretty clear that $10,000 has a much greater impact on our financial situation than $1,000 does. And this is true in lots of circumstances. It's not just with money, that $10,000 has a much greater impact than $1,000. And so why so often do we act like this principle doesn't apply to us? And here's what I mean, a couple examples. Often we would rather spread things out and we'd rather put $1,000 in 10 different places than to put $10,000 into one place. And here's the problem with that. If you give 10 hungry people $1 each, they're all still hungry. But if you give one hungry person $10, they're buying lunch. You've made a real tangible impact. And this is not true just with money. This is true about a lot of things. It's true about our time and where we choose to spend our time. And we can spend an hour here and make maybe a small impact, but we can spend 10 hours. And then we're really getting somewhere. That's a full day's worth of work. Or with our energy and effort, we can invest it a little bit, or we can invest a lot of it into one place. And then we really can do something. And so we can only do so much, right? We all only have so much to offer and so much to give. And so how do we maximize our impact with our limited capacity? How do we maximize our impact with our limited capacity? That's the question we'll wrestle with this morning as we continue our series More Together based on this passage in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. It says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works." There's some impact right there, love and good works. "Not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." Let's remember this was either a letter or a message spoken to a group of people who were being persecuted for their faith. Some of them were being killed simply because they were Christians. And this is the encouragement that the author gives, to persevere and to stir up one another to love and good works. And this will be our focus today. And this love and good works, these are results of salvation. Let's remember that. These are results of being saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. These are not requirements in order to try to earn salvation, but these are results of it. And so in this, we find the answer to our question, how do we maximize our impact with our limited capacity? And it's to have unity of mission and vision. Because when we're together more, we have more impact. And there are two reasons that I want to share with you this morning that this is true. When we're together more, we have more impact. And the first is that it helps us to focus. It helps us to focus when we're together, because when we come together in unity around a single mission, then we can focus on what we're doing, the most important things and the most impactful things. When we're together more, we have more impact. There's a company called Apple Inc. that maybe you've heard about, maybe you have in your pocket right now. So Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, in about 1997, he became the CEO of Apple Incorporated. And when he came on board, Apple had over 15 different similar but different products that they offered. And what had happened was retailers and big box stores would come to Apple and say, we want a desktop computer that will do this in this specific way. And then another retailer would come and say, we want a computer that'll do that, but it's got to be faster, or it's got to be bigger, or it's got to have more memory in it. So there were lots of similar requirements, and Apple was making a new computer for each one. And so Steve Jobs came in, and he reduced the product line from over 15 different computers to just 4. He said, we're going to have a desktop and a portable device for professionals and consumers. Those were the 4. That was it, just 4. And you might think that Apple may have lost market share. You may think that Apple lost their impact on the industry or struggled for a little while. The fact is, in 1996, before Steve Jobs walked his team through this process, Apple lost $1 billion. Can you imagine losing $1 billion? And then in 1997, the very next year, as they walked through this process, Apple turned a $300 million profit. That's a $1.3 billion turnaround in a year because they said, we're going to focus. And we're going to do a few things really, really well. And this whole process that Steve Jobs walked his team through stemmed from one question. This is where it all started. He asked his team members, what do I tell my friends to buy? What do I tell my friends to buy? And what he found was his team couldn't give him a satisfactory answer. He found that they would say, well, if they want to do this task, they could use this computer, but if they want to use this program, they should buy this computer. And Steve Jobs was not happy with that. He said, we've got to simplify. We've got to have a simple answer to this question. So we need to ask ourselves this morning. I want you to ask yourself, where do my friends start at Sunrise? If a friend came with you through the door for the first time and they asked you, where do I start? What would you tell them? Is it a simple answer? So the lesson that we can learn from this process at Apple is that if everything is important, then nothing is. You ever read a book and highlighted every word of the book? You don't do that because how would you know what to go back to, what was important? If everything is important, then nothing is. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, yeah, but Apple's a business. This is a business strategy, and we're not a business, we're a church. And it's true that Apple's a business and we're a church, but my response is that this is not a business strategy. This is an impact strategy. This is a thriving strategy. This is how the mission gets moved. And we can look for proof. We can look at where Apple is now, right? We talk about iPhones and Android phones, but we don't bother to talk about all the different options in the Android family. The Samsungs, the LGs, the Googles, all of those. We talk about iPads and we talk about tablets. And we don't talk about all these different options that are in this tablet category. It's the impact that Apple has made on the industry to the point now where in that technology, that electronics sector, it's Apple versus the world. They've made that impact on that industry. And this applies to the church because shouldn't the church make an even greater impact on the world around us than a corporation? What if Sunrise became known for the impact that we make right here in our community? And when the Israelites returned from exile, led by a guy named Nehemiah, he walked them through a similar process. This is not my ideas that I'm sharing with you this morning. This is from Scripture. Nehemiah walked some exiles through a similar process. He was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, which means he would, give him his cup at meals and he would keep it full of wine. And when Nehemiah heard a message from some messengers that the city of Jerusalem was in ruins and it had been burned and destroyed, it grieved him and he mourned over it. To the point where at one meal, King Artaxerxes looks at him and says, "What's wrong with you?" And so Nehemiah explains the situation, and he musters up the courage to ask the king, can I go back to Jerusalem, and can I lead a group of exiles to rebuild the city? And to his surprise, the king actually gives him permission. He says, yeah, go. And the problem was that there was some opposition to rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. And there were some people who said, if this is rebuilt, these foolish Israelites, we're going to attack them. And so Nehemiah and his workers find out that these people are threatening to attack, and that's where we pick up in the book of Nehemiah. It's written by Nehemiah, chapter 4, verses 15 to 23. It says, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, meaning we found out that they were going to attack, and God's frustrated their plan. They're not going to be able to do it. We all returned to the wall, each to his work. So this is the strategy, part one, for rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. We're going to rebuild the wall so that we have a defense mechanism around us, something that can protect the city. And there's a second piece to the strategy of rebuilding Jerusalem that Nehemiah gives the people, and I want you to pay attention and see if you can pick it out. We'll continue. It says, from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, meaning the leaders were surrounded by the house of Judah working on the city wall. And so they were safe to lead the work and instruct and help the work move forward. So it says the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens, meaning construction materials and supplies for the wall, were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me being Nehemiah. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. And all of the people ignored Nehemiah and went and did their own thing. Right? No, that's not what happens. Nehemiah continues, so we labored at the work. And just as he said, half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. Meaning don't go back to your outlying village that's kind of near Jerusalem. Just stay here. Spend the night here so that we can guard the city together as we build. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. So Nehemiah is not only giving these instructions and clarifying this strategy, but he's also taking part of it in it. He's not above it. So what we see is that Nehemiah gave a clear and unified strategy to accomplish the mission of rebuilding the city, right? He says we're going to start with the wall. And if you notice, the second piece of the strategy is in the process, we're going to protect the city. We're going to protect the city. And so when it comes to rebuilding the wall, what Nehemiah had in mind, of course, and what you, I'm sure, have in mind, is a single continuous wall surrounding and hemming in and protecting the city. But what would have happened if Nehemiah's workers had decided, we probably need this one singular wall, but I'm going to go and build my own wall segment, and it's just going to be separate from everybody else's? We would have ended up with a lot of people working far apart on different projects, and the city would not be any better off. It still wouldn't be protected. And what would likely happen is these attackers would see this, and they would come and pick these people off one by one, or these small groups off one by one, and then the city, again, would be left defenseless. And they would come and ransack it again and burn it again. And when it came to protecting the city, this also was an all-hands-on-deck effort. Nehemiah says to make sure you keep your weapon with you, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, gather to where you hear it. But what would have happened if some people heard the sound of the trumpet and said, I know I'm supposed to go there and gather, but I have an idea. I think instead I'm going to run out and meet our attackers, and I'm going to fight them out there outside the city. I think it's clear that that small band of outnumbered workers would have been defeated by this great army that far outnumbered and outgunned them. And when Nehemiah said, don't go home to your own villages, but stay here for the night, what would have happened if they all said, well, I hear what you're saying, but I'd really prefer to go home to my own village. I'd really prefer to sleep in my own bed tonight. What would have happened then? I think one by one, these small outlying villages would have been surrounded, and the people would have been picked off, and the city, again, would be left vulnerable with no one to protect it. So they needed to have a single, clear, unified strategy in order to rebuild the city and start with the wall and protect the city. And we have to have a single, clear strategy too, because when we're together more, we have more impact. When we're together more, we have more impact. And as I've talked about, our focus is tightened, and we're no longer distracted by everything else that comes in. Our distractions are eliminated. So in order to have a greater impact, to maximize our impact with our limited resources, we have to be together more, because when we're together more, we have more impact. And the second thing that we need is collaboration. And I know this word is not as fun or as catchy as the word focus, but I think it's an important word for us. And if you've been in the business world at all, maybe you've heard it put as this word, synergy. But I think the idea of collaboration is very similar, but slightly different, because collaboration is literally co-laboring. It's working alongside one another and working with one another on one single unified mission. And when we collaborate, we get a multiple return on our investment. We will never get out less than we put in, because the whole is greater than the sum of the individuals. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And we see this in the book of Ecclesiastes, which, if you haven't read Ecclesiastes, it's probably the most depressing book in the Bible. It's written by a guy named King Solomon, who was King David's son. King David, the most well-known of Israel's kings. Solomon was his son, and he was known for two things. The first was his riches. He was known for having so much gold and silver, precious stones, and cedars, which were, something that were to be desired as a very strong wood that structures could be built with, and a very ornate wood that could be carved. And so he was known for his riches, and more importantly, he was known for his wisdom. So this is the guy who's writing this, a guy who was known for his wisdom, who asked God, prayed to God for wisdom, and God was pleased and honored in that. And so he granted Solomon more wisdom than anyone else. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, where we pick up, Solomon is writing about how meaningless and miserable it is for one person to work endlessly alone. And that's where we pick up in chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. It says, 2 are better than 1. There we go. We could probably stop there. It's pretty clear, right? 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to help him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. They accomplish their purpose. They accomplish the thing that they need to do in order to thrive. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. If someone attacks one person, that person may be able to defend themselves. But if there's a group of 2 that's being attacked, they're much more likely to defend themselves. And what Solomon is saying is, if you add a third person, now you've got a gang and you're pretty safe. You can handle that one attacker. So what we can learn from this, our lesson is that the impact we make in collaboration is greater than the sum of our impacts in isolation. The impact we can make in collaboration, working together, unified and focused, is greater than the sum of the impacts we can make alone in isolation, individually. Collaboration is better than isolation. One person can do a little, two people can do more, and 3 people can do a lot more, a whole lot more. I am the world's worst party planner, quite possibly. That is just not my strength, planning events. Victoria is really good at it. It is one of her strengths. She's really good at hospitality and hosting people. And so if I were to plan a party for some people, I could maybe handle 5. I do not have the skills. This is not in my wheelhouse. I could maybe handle 5 and pull something half decent off. But if it's Victoria and me, I think we could pretty easily handle 20 people. And I'm probably undercutting her skills and talents there. But pretty easy, we can handle 20 people. Now, in a few years when Joel is older and we have a 3rd person, now we've got a threefold cord, and we can host a lot more people and throw a pretty great party. The same principle is true if you're lifting something heavy. If you have somebody who's pretty strong, they could probably lift something that's 100 pounds. And if you add a 2nd person, they can probably lift 200 pounds. 1 can do some, 2 can do more. If you add a 3rd person, I don't think they'd lift 300 pounds. I think they could actually probably lift more. And the reason is you have this effect of stabilization where whatever you're lifting isn't tipping back and forth so much. It's not swaying so much. It's more stable. And so I bet 3 people could lift more than 300 pounds if you have 3 strong people. And this is the concept that assembly lines in modern factories are built around. Not that we have one person who takes a product all the way from start and assembles all the pieces and puts them all together and produces a finished product, but that we have one person who becomes really good at one part of the process, who becomes really fast and quick and efficient and excellent at this one part of the process, and then the product moves down to the next person who's excellent at their portion. And so what happens is when we have this assembly line, we can produce more and we have higher quality products at the end of the process than if one person worked all the way down the line with a single product. Can produce more and we can have higher quality. Victoria and I have experienced this principle at 14,000 feet in the air, hiking Mount Bierstadt in Colorado, which is a 14er. If you're not familiar with the terminology, it's what us nerds refer to as, it's a mountain that's over 14,000 feet in elevation. And so we were hiking Mount Bierstadt, and we were with a group of about 8 or 10 others along with us, and we had reached the summit, which is always a celebration. You know, you made it, but you can't celebrate too much because it's hard to breathe. And so you usually sit, rest a bit, take a snack. According to social media, you have to take a picture at the top, so we had done that. And so we had turned around, and we started to make our 4-mile trek back to the car down the mountain. And it's pretty steep, and it's really rocky still up at the top. And we get about a 1/4 mile, maybe a 1/2 mile down from the summit, and out in front of us, too far away to do anything about, we see this woman, and I'm not sure if she slipped or if she tripped, but if you've ever been walking downhill, you know that if you fall, you want to fall backwards. But she fell forwards. And what we saw is her kind of bounce and skid and hit her head on a rock. And she clearly needed some help. And can you imagine if only one of us went and asked her, hey, how can we help? What do you need? And the other 9 or so of us decided, well, I'm just going to rest here a minute, or I'm going to keep hiking down the mountain, or I'm going to go pick some daisies, or I'm going to go fight the marmot that's a couple 100 feet away, because there's lots of those on the tops of mountains. What if only one person asked what she needed or tried to help? She might have eventually gotten the care that she needed, but that person may not have had all the supplies, or it's really difficult to focus sometimes, or to have enough energy and stamina at 14,000 feet in the air. What if only one person offered to help her? Or what if all of us offered to go and help her, but we all tried to do it on our own and didn't communicate with one another? In her time of need, she would have had a bunch of people in her face. What do you need? How can I help you? And she probably would have ended up with a lot of water and a lot of snacks, but not the other care that she needed to be able to get safely down the mountain. We would have been treating it as 10 different individual, distinct projects instead of one unified person who needed help. But instead, what actually happened is we all worked together. We were able to take care of this woman, and very quickly, because we communicated with one another. We were able to take care of everything she needed: water and food and first aid and support, and someone to, make sure her head didn't fall back and hit another rock. And I think between the 10 of us, we could have carried her the 4 miles down that mountain if we had to. Because when we're together more, we have more impact. And the amazing thing when I think back to that story, when I think back to that event, being up in the thin air like that, and I run through, the video of it in my head, what is so amazing is how each person contributed in a different way. And I can think, no wonder. We all were using our natural talents and skills and abilities and our own natural tendencies. And so it's no wonder that John was the person who got there first and was asking her, what do you need? How can we help you? And Michelle was the one who was talking to her family that was with her and keeping them calm and comforting them. And Joshua was the one offering her water. And Nick is the one supporting her and holding her up because he's huge and jacked. And Victoria is looking her over and offering first aid. And if you know me, you know it's absolutely no surprise at all that I am the one offering her a snack. What is amazing is the way that we all naturally contributed to that situation. And it took time. Don't get me wrong, we all knew each other pretty well, or most of us. We were pretty close friends, or we had worked on church staffs together, or we had volunteered in some capacity together. So it took time to get there. But this is the impact that we can have when we're together more. When we're together more, we have more impact. And this is why Pastor Chris has asked me to work on forming a life group model and a life group strategy that's revamped a bit. And why I haven't been doing that in isolation, but I've been leading a team this summer to talk about this and figure out what this will look like and how to make it not just be a generic life group thing, but how to make it fit the personality of Sunrise and the way that we are already uniquely wired as Sunrise Baptist Church. And it's amazing because it fulfills this in two ways. When we're together more, we have more impact because we're now no longer individuals serving in different places, but we come together as groups. It's not one person anymore. It's 10 people, 8 or 12 people serving in the same place right alongside one another. And it's also, it fulfills this because we all make a bigger impact as a church when we're focused around one unified strategy. And I know that what you may be hearing me say right now is change. And change is loss. And I understand that. Change is loss. And so it's okay to grieve and mourn a little bit. And I'll talk a bit more about that next week and kind of answer the question, what's in it for me? Because in the back of our mind, we're all asking that question. But we can make a bigger impact as a church this way. And so I want to share with you kind of a final lesson that I've learned. And I've seen time and time again in my time as a risk management consultant and then in my time as an executive pastor in Colorado. I've come across this in organizations, businesses and churches time and time again. So I want you to imagine a large weight, like a 500-pound weight in the middle of a swimming pool. I don't know if you watched swimming on the Olympics a couple weeks ago, but Victoria and I, it's one of our favorite events to watch. So imagine this 500-pound weight in the middle of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's probably not to scale. And those are little waves to remind you that this is water, because I am an artiste. These are waves. They're not sharks. I know now that I look at it, they kind of look like sharks. And they could be, but let's think of it as a swimming pool just to simplify this. So we have this Olympic-sized swimming pool with a 500-pound weight in the middle of it, and we've got to get it out. And this is our strategy. All of us are those yellow arrows. What happens when we approach it this way? And one person says, I think we got to go to this corner. And one person says, no, we got to go to this side. One person says, no, we got to bring it to the end. And we're all going our own way, and we're not communicating, and we're not collaborating. What happens in this situation? With all of our effort, we don't go anywhere. We're trying to pull this weight in different directions. The weight doesn't move. And eventually what happens is it pulls us down, and we all drown. And I want to tell you why this is so important. That weight is our mission. I know that Pastor Chris has told you many times that Sunrise doesn't exist just to come here on Sunday morning, but our mission is to live the truth and love the lost and make disciples regardless of the cost. And so what would happen if we instead took a different approach and we did this process a little bit differently, and we all came around together and agreed on one unified strategy, and we began to all swim in the same direction? The weight moves, and we move our mission forward. We move our mission forward because we have more focus. We have a unified strategy and a refined strategy. And we can all look at this and remember Steve Jobs' question, what do I tell my friends to buy? We can all answer the question really easily, where do I tell my friends to start? And when new people walk through the door, it's not such a complex problem, but it's very clear where they can get connected and get involved. And they're less overwhelmed. Have you ever been to a restaurant where you sit down and they hand you the menu and it weighs about 10 pounds and it looks like a novel? In my experience, and I think you'll agree, that is simultaneously an overwhelming and an underwhelming experience. And here's what I mean. It's overwhelming because there are so many options, and I don't know what to choose for my meal. And it's also underwhelming because when I see all of these options, I realize none of them are probably that great. None of them are really focused in on what this restaurant's wheelhouse is and what they're best at. It's like going to the Italian restaurant and ordering a cheeseburger. You just don't do it. It's not that good. And so when we use this method to advance our mission, we become more effective in our efforts and we become more excellent in our execution. And we stay within our wheelhouse, and we focus and we collaborate. And here is the most exciting and really the most important part of all of this, is that when we approach it this way, we can move things from the way that they are to the way things can be. This is the mission of redemption that God has given his church and entrusted us and tasked us with. And this is the ministry of reconciliation that Jesus has made us ambassadors for, moving things from the way that they are to the way that they can be in our communities and toward the way that they ultimately will be when Jesus comes back to restore all things and make them new. This is why this is so important. And this is an impact strategy, not a business strategy. And when we look at this, we may wonder, well, where can I start? Where can I serve? How do I fit in? And that question, a few weeks ago, there's in this men's ministry conversation thread, somebody said this. And so these are not my words. Don't get mad at me. They said, the question, where can I serve, is not optional for believers. If you are following Jesus, the question, where can I serve, is not optional for you. And it doesn't have to be complex either. It doesn't have to be complex, because when we look at this and we see the lane lines and we see the way we're going about this and we see the way everyone's pulling, well, we can jump right in the pool and chain up on that mission and keep pulling the same way and see how we fit and start working on the mission immediately. And it's not complex because we can serve the people right alongside of us in our group, and we can serve with the people right alongside of us in our community. This question, where can I serve, only becomes difficult and more complex when we aren't consistently around others in a community that's committed to one another. And this is why we have, as this team, task force, working this summer on what our life group model will look like. We have infused in this model a service element, so that each person in a life group will have a built-in way to serve the community with the people closest to them, with the people right around them, and also to be able to serve those people in the group right around them. And you may be thinking, but what if I like to volunteer at the food pantry? And I have a friend who likes to go and share the gospel downtown. And I know someone who likes to teach kids. I would say, great. If you want to do those things, do those things. And I would remind you that the vision of Sunrise is not to live, love, and learn, but to live together and love together and learn together. It's in those places where we come together and do this together that we grow the most, because we grow the most two ways: when we're helping other people grow and serving other people, and we grow the most when we're together in community, in relationships. And so in life groups, we've decided to marry these two together, to be in committed community and to serve together. And these are not my ideas. This is not something that's brand new. In fact, it's been around a lot longer than you or I have. This is the way that Jesus did it. Jesus is the one person in history who could have accomplished his mission on his own, right? But he chose not to. He chose to invite a ragtag band of 12 guys along with him. And he equipped them and he unleashed those 12. And they were together more, and they had more impact. And they lived together, and they loved together, and they learned together right alongside Jesus himself. And they shared the common mission that he had given them. And even when he ascended into heaven, the 11 that were left continued the unified, focused mission to share the good news of Jesus with the world. They were together more, and they had more impact. The other time that this question becomes a really complex one is when we're not around others in community. When we choose to isolate, remember, collaboration is better than isolation. When we choose to isolate, what happens is we become self-centered and self-seeking, and we enter this assumption that everyone should be serving me, but I don't expect to have to serve anybody else. Right? Have you ever been there? You ever felt that? Everyone should be serving me. This all revolves around me. We become self-centered and we don't serve others, but this is exactly counter to the way that Jesus did it. In Mark 10:45, these are Jesus' words. He said, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And ultimately, Jesus took our sins inside himself so that we could take our focus outside of ourselves. And we could focus on the mission and focus on the most important and impactful things, because when we're together more, we have more impact. And when we get a clear and focused mission, when we get outside of ourselves and come together in a community that's committed to one another, and we're unified, we can do the things that we couldn't do or we wouldn't do on our own. And like Nehemiah and his wall builders, we can rebuild broken things and restore broken things right here in our community. And like a cord that has many strands, we can support one another and strengthen one another We can lift one another up and carry the slack when others aren't able to. And we can maximize our impact right here together.